you so much for that wonderful introduction, Serena. Thank you, Books Are Magic, and Michael for putting everything together. Thank you, my dear Camille, for being here with me. It's such a blessing to see you and on Earth Day. And I'm just so delighted. And we did not plan to match this like extraordinarily. I really love this. So I thought what I would do is just read um, probably, I'm going to say 5 poems. And then I've asked Camille to read one of my all-time favorite poems. And then we'll have a discussion um, and so forth. And because it is Earth Day, I thought I would begin with a poem that I was thinking about my ancestors. And I love to honor and value and sing the praises of my human ancestors. But I thought I also come from the trees. And because it's Earth Day, I thought I would begin with a poem called Ancestors that's really about trees. Ancestors. I've come here from the rocks, the bone-like chert, obsidian, lava rock. I've come here from the trees, chestnut, bay laurel, toyon, acacia, redwood, cedar, 1,000 oaks that bend with moss and old man's beard. I was born on a green couch on Carragher Road between the vineyards and the horse pasture. I don't remember what I first saw, the brick of light that unhinged me from the beginning. I don't remember my brother's face, my mother, my father. Later, I remember leaves. Through car windows, through bedroom windows, through the classroom window, the way they shaded and patterned the ground. All that power from roots. Imagine you must survive without running. I've come from the lacing patterns of leaves. I do not know where else I belong. Maybe all my poems are for trees. As I read that, I wonder about that. I'm going to also read a poem about dandelions. And I know many people want to poison them, but on this Earth Day, I will say, do not use weed killer. Do not poison the dandelions. They are what feeds the bees, especially early in the season, because there aren't other flowers around. So yes, Dandelion Club. Yes, please. So dandelion insomnia. The big ass bees are back, tipsy, sun-drunk, and heavy with thick knitted leg warmers of pollen. I was up all night again, so today's yellow hour seems strange and hallucinogenic. The neighborhood is lousy with mowers, crazy dogs, and people mending what winter ruined. What I can't get over is something simple, easy. How could a dandelion seed head seemingly grow overnight? A neighbor mows the lawn and bam, the next morning there's 100 dandelion seed heads, straight as arrows and proud as cats, high above any green blade of manicured grass. It must bug some folks. A flower so tricky it can reproduce asexually. Perfect identical selves. Bam, another me. Bam, another me. I can't help it. I root for that persecuted rosette, so hyper in its own making, it seems to devour the land. Even its name, translated from the French, dent de lion, means lion's tooth. It's vicious, made for a time that requires tenacity, a way of remaking the toughest self while everyone else is asleep. My husband is here with me, and he's not a fan of dandelions, as as he's the one who has to do most of the weeding. So, but we don't poison them. This is a poem that I was thinking, and Camille and I have talked about this a lot, about what you do with the great despair and solastalgia that you feel about the climate crisis, and how it seems so easy sometimes just to give up and surrender and just be like, well, there's nothing we can do. It's too overwhelming. And in doing so, of course, you do more damage and do more harm. And so this is a poem that kind of came out of like, what do you do with that impulse? Um, so yeah, it's Dead Stars. Out here, there's a bowing, even the trees are doing. Winter's icy hand on the back of all of us, black bark, slick yellow leaves, a kind of stillness that feels so mute it's almost in another year. I am a hearth of spiders these days, a nest of trying. We point out the stars that make Orion as we take out the trash, the rolling containers, a song of suburban thunder. It's almost romantic as we adjust the waxy blue recycling bin until you say, man, we should really learn some new constellations. And it's true. We keep forgetting about Antlia, Centaurus, Draco, Lacerta, Hydra, Lyra, Lynx. But mostly we're forgetting we're dead stars too. My mouth is full of dust and I wish to reclaim the rising, to lean in the spotlight of streetlight with you toward what's larger within us, toward how we were born. Look, we are not unspectacular things. We've come this far, survived this much. What would happen if we decided to survive more, to love harder? What if we stood up with our synapses and flesh and said no, no to the rising tides? Stood for the many mute mouths of the sea, the land? What would happen if we used our bodies to bargain for the safety of others, for Earth? If we declared it a clean night? If we stopped being terrified? If we launched our demands into the sky, made ourselves so big people could point to us with the arrows they make in their minds, rolling their trash bins out after all of this is over? Um, and I'll just read two more. I wanted to read a poem that I feel really speaks to Camille's poem. And I don't know why I feel like it does, but I feel like it speaks to characteristics of life. Let me just see if I can find it. It's so, this paperback, you guys, is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. It, you know, it's got the amazing, like the French flaps, right? It's gorgeous, feels nice. Thank you, Milkweed. So this is the poem I was thinking about. If you know Camille's amazing poem, Characteristics of Life, this somehow is in conversation with it, I think. And it's really a poem to a cave. Notes on the below from Mammoth Cave National Park. Tell me, humongous cavern, tell me wet limestone, sandstone, caprock, batwing, sightless, translucent cave shrimp, this endless plummet into none of the unknown. Tell me how one keeps secrets for so long. All my life, I've lived above the ground. Car wheels over paved roads, roots breaking through concrete, and still I've not understood the real of this life's purpose. Not so much living, but a hovering without sense. What's it like to be always night? No moon, but a few lit up circles at your openings, endless dark, still time must enter you like a train, like a green river. Tell me what it is to be the thing rooted in shadow, to be the thing not touched by light. No, that's not it. To not even need the light. I envy that. Desire is a tricky thing, the boiling of the body's wants, more praise, more hands to holding the knives away. I've been the one who has craved and craved until I could not see beyond my own greed. There's a whole nation of us. To forgive myself, I point to the earth as witness. To you, your frozen Niagara, your fat man's misery, you with your 400 miles of interlocking caves that lead only to more of you. Tell me what it is to be so quiet and yet still breathing. Ruler of the underlying, let me speak to both the dead and the living as you do. Speak to the ruined earth, the stalactites, the eastern small-footed bat, to honor this, the length of days, to speak to the core that creates and swallows, to speak not always to what's shouting, but to what's underneath, asking for nothing. I am at the mouth of the cave. I am willing to crawl. Camille, I don't think I've ever told you that, but I know that your poem was with me when I wrote that poem. And I'll just read one more poem. Thank you again for being here. I can't wait to start talking with Camille and to hear her poem. And this is a poem I wrote when I was struggling to love this country, like every day. I just said when I was, like it was a thing that had happened and now it has been solved. But I realized that the way in to the love of this country has always been through the land. And so because it's Earth Day, I think this poem might celebrate that fact. A new national anthem. The truth is, I've never cared for the national anthem. If you think about it, it's not a good song. Too high for most of us with the rocket's red glare. And then there are the bombs. Always, always, there's war and bombs. Once I sang it at homecoming and threw even the tenacious high school band off key. But the song didn't mean anything, just a call to the field, something to get through before the pummeling of youth. And what of the stanzas we never sing? The third that mentions no refuge could save the hireling and the slave. Perhaps the truth is, every song of this country has an unsung third stanza, something brutal snaking underneath us as we absent-mindedly sing the high notes with a beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. Don't get me wrong, I do like the flag. How it undulates in the wind like water, elemental, best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything, when it's not a weapon, when it flickers, when it folds up so perfectly you can keep it until it's needed, until you can love it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance, a song where the notes are sung by even the ageless woods, the short grass plains, the Red River Gorge, the fistful of land left unpoisoned. The song that's our birthright, that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on, that sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's, that sounds like a match being lit in an endless cave. The song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones, and isn't that enough? Thank you.
Oh, Ada. This is what she does, everybody. She gets up and she's very, very clear about how long she's going to read and how many poems she's going to read. And from the very beginning, you think, but why so few? Could we just read the whole book together? It was so lovely to hear you read from this. It is really a beautiful book. Milkweed did a lovely job. They're the French flaps, and then those nice black pages. I'm a fan of black pages in a book. It's a pretty object, people, the good space between the two sections. So if you're in that participant pool, make sure to go up in the chat and see how you can get your signed copy from Books Are Magic, because these independent bookstores are keeping real literature alive in this country. So we need to do what we can to help them also. All right, Ada told me to read a poem. So you do what Ada Limón tells you to do, right? This is the title poem for my collection, Trophic Cascade. Trophic Cascade. After the reintroduction of gray wolves to Yellowstone, and as anticipated, their culling of deer, trees grew beyond the deer stunt of the mid-century. In their upreach, songbirds nested, who scattered seed for underbrush, and in that cover, warrened snowshoe hare. Weasel and water shrew returned, also vole, and came soon hawk and falcon, bald eagle, kestrel, and with them, hawk shadow, falcon shadow. Eagle shade and kestrel shade haunted newly buried runnels where mule deer no longer rummaged, cautious as they were now of being surprised by wolves. Berries brought bear, while undergrowth and willows growing now right down to the river brought beavers who dam. Muskrats came to the dams and tadpoles came to the night song of the fathers of tadpoles. With water striders, the dark gray American dipper bobbed in fresh pools of the river, and fish stayed, and the bear who fished also culled deer fawns, and to their kill scraps came vulture and coyote, long gone in the region until now, and their scattered seed, and more trees, brush, and berries grew up along the river that had run straight and so flooded, but thus dammed, compelled to meander, is less prone to overrun. Don't you tell me this is not the same as my story. All this life, born from one hungry animal. This whole new landscape, the course of the river changed. I know this. I reintroduced myself to myself, this time a mother, after which nothing was ever the same.
I
All
love
right.
that poem so much. I love that poem so much. I reintroduced
Question.
myself to myself.
I have a question that's related both to that poem and what you were saying about characteristics of life, and your Mammoth Cave poem, which I love that poem. And I feel like it has something to do with listing and the power of listing and catalogs in poetry. And you just do it so much. You see and you pull and you compile in your work, and in those lists and catalogs, you are able to reveal new and unexpected connections and revelations. So can you talk about the quality of listing for poetry? And then also, are you like a person? Do you like just walk down the street and make lists anyway? Or is that a trick that happens just for you on the page?
Yeah, I love that question. I love lists. I think you do it gorgeously in your poems, and it's something I think that we both, it's an anchor for us. I feel like, yeah, I absolutely write lists daily. I don't know if I have like, these are almost always like the notes for the day, check marks, like everything is like a list. Um, I write them down so that when I'm walking, I'm actually not making the list because the list lives here, so that when I'm walking, I can actually notice my environment. But I think that really that accumulation, that naming, that idea of listing what we're seeing is also a way of being present. And then it feels like a way of honoring. Like, I don't know the native names of trees, right? Like which native language is associated with which language, which tree. But just even the honoring of knowing the common name feels like something that makes it more connected to me, as opposed to it's just a tree, I don't know what it is. And then the minute that happened in my life, the minute I was able to identify something, or someone said the name of a flower or a plant or an animal, and I thought, it's a what? Like, right? Like, I mean, this is how my brain works. Like, I remember, I thought, wow, I've never had a hardcover go to a paperback because I've never had a hardcover, right? So the Carrying's my first hardcover. And I kept thinking in my head, oh, it's like the paperback tree. And then I was like, no, that's not what it's called, right? It's called the paper bark tree. But my head had immediately changed it to the paperback tree. But just like I remember hearing that name for the first time, the paper bark tree, and loving that. And so I think that there's so much music in there, but there's also an honoring. And those two things are always combined and weaved for me. Is it the same for you? I should ask.
It is absolutely about honoring, and it's about companionship. I feel closer to those entities who I can name, who I know, who I can recognize in that way. And so that creates an intimacy in the work too, that I'm not talking about something that's away and separate. Those moments in your poem where you just crack open into really incredibly vulnerable, personal revelations, I think, are really only possible because you have the intimacy with the space and the other entities in that space that you're speaking with.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think about that story of, like, the Buddha when he was becoming enlightened, or he was on his way, whatever that we believe in, the story of that. The last thing that visited him, right, was self-doubt, like the last thing that was like going to pull him off his journey. And it was like the question of, who do you think you are? And I'm like, oh, that's what we do as poets too, right? We're like, who do you think you are to even, who do I think I am to even write this? And in that story, what I always loved is that what he does in response is he points to the earth. And in the story, that in some versions, the earth kind of shakes in response. And I've always thought, like, right, like I am not just me. I am also a part of this larger thing. And that's who I think I am.
Mhm,
And that is where I hope my poetry comes from.
mhm. Yeah. Well, I told you this morning, I woke up at like 3 in the morning, everybody, which I do sometimes. And then when I do that, I just go read a book. And sometimes I'll read a book and then I'll go back to bed. But today I read a book and decided to write like a bunch of book reviews, as one does. And so one of them was this, 500 word love letter to the Carrying, which I won't read the entirety to you guys today. You can check it out next week. Actually, it'll be posted on the Orion online next week, and you can read it. But I do want to hit this one moment, which brings me to like a question about your process again. I'm talking in it about the way that you'll sort of declare one thing and I'll be like, yes, that is the only way to see the world. And then just a few lines later, or a couple pages later, you'll have some just entirely different, completely contradictory reality. And there's a moment in one poem, you begin the poem saying, seeing this gorgeous layer of snow outlining the maple like a halo. And then in the next line, you clarify that the snow actually looks like a fungus. The world, it seems to you, you're not afraid to point out that the world is full of ugly and kind of grotesque and scary. But then later in the poem, you stare more closely at the tree, and now the ice has melted, and it's only the original tree again, green branches giving way to other green branches, everything coming back to life. And what I say is that I begin to understand in your poem that the world is often more beautiful than it really is. And
Mm.
you see that. And then you'll turn and you'll be like, the world is way uglier than it really is. And then you'll turn again and say, the world just is as it is. Again, like, I feel like that's a particular kind of perception, to be able to hold all of those realities at once. As you're writing, do you demand that of yourself? You know, do you stop at a certain point and say, but what's the ugly part, or what's the pretty part, or what's the real part? Or does that, come more naturally to you as you're moving?
Mm. I love that question. And yeah, isn't that, I mean, I always am so, I don't want to say obsessed, but like really intrigued by the idea of how what we're going through colors everything that we look at, right? Like some days the all of the beauty is just so much power and gorgeousness and richness, and some days, the beauty can be too much and it's hard to take, and it actually feels um, like what Wanda Coleman said, like, serene, delusionally, delusionally, serenely, delusionally rural, right? Like
Hmm.
it can
Hmm.
feel like there's delusion to it. Um, and so I think I'm very aware of what it is that I am bringing to the image. And in my reality, I think I'm often interrogating myself, going, that is that true? Is that true now? Or was that true earlier? Is that still true? And I
Hmm.
think that that is a question that's on my mind constantly, not just in my poems, but like, is that really what I believe? Um, and I've always distrusted the moment where I'm like, yep, that this is it. I have it down 100%. I've got this answer to this feeling. Because 2 seconds later, I'm like, maybe I feel a little differently. And I think that that mercurial humanity that lives within me is something that I am trying to stay true to on the page, because I don't think that we ever, I mean, I don't think we have a moment where we figure it all out. Um, and I mean, I think you and I would both sort of distrust someone who was like, no, I've got this all figured out. So for me, I think the questions and the self-interrogation are definitely part of the process. But I also think, like most things, they're definitely part of me as a human being and my witnessing of the world.
Hmm. And can you talk a little bit about what that means about vulnerability on the page?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to be like we were laughing the other day about, right, like the word vulnerable feels like vulnerable and authenticity are just so overused right now that I laugh that like you hear them and you like, oh yeah, I like those things, and then you're suddenly like buying peanut butter because they're like, oh, this peanut butter is vulnerable and authentic, like it feels like there's like the packaging of the world is really weird right now. um but I think that but yeah, I do think that kind of honesty and that kind of vulnerability, I do think it comes from that interrogation, because I'm constantly asking myself, well, is this the story I would just tell because it's easier? Or is it the truth? And I think that I'm very much aware sometimes that there's a thing that we say to the stranger, there's a thing that we say because we have 5 minutes and we just need to, be like, okay, no, I'm doing well, everything's great, and then you get in your car and cry. Like I'm much more interested in like, okay, how come I got in the car and cried? What's going on? But I'm also interested in the fact that we're always two people, that public facing self and the interior self. And that interiority is part of that in self-interrogation, right? It's like, okay, I am this person, but also I'm this person. And how is this person doing in the inside, right? The cave me, how am I doing? And sometimes they require different things, and sometimes they have different stories they need to tell. And I think that innermost self wants to be honest in a way that sometimes even my outer self is like, don't say that. Please put the pen down, back away from the page. But then that person in me that feels like that it's almost desperate to say the truth is often in charge, or at least released in certain moments.
Do you give yourself permission to write but not share?
That's a great question. I think that honestly, probably half of the carrying was written with the idea of writing for myself to explore things that I was going through, infertility, whether or not we were going to have a child, all of these things. And I just had to write them because I had to write them. But I had to write them also with like, these will not go anywhere. Because if I thought of an audience and really engage with an audience in that original state, I don't think I would have written the poems that are here. I think I would have been, I don't want to say censoring, but I think there would have been a pleasing, maybe a politeness that was happening. And so I think that just knowing that maybe no one would read it and I could just write what I wanted to write allowed me to be maybe more of my monstery self, you know?
Where was this in relationship to Bright Dead Things too? Because there might have been even more of a public eye on you, and that could have added to the scariness.
Absolutely, because, I mean, one of the things I remember a friend saying like, oh, no one will read this book because it's the follow-up to the book that did really well, which was Bright Dead Things. And so part of me was like, okay, that's good because I'll write down all my secrets. And then, but then of course there was other people being like, no, this next book, like people are waiting for your next book now. And that's never happened. I mean, the moment where like you think your first book comes out and you assume that everyone's like going to ask you when the next book is, and like the question never really comes.
I did. I wanted the next book personally.
Yeah, I wanted to know when my book was coming, but it wasn't like there were people going, we can't wait. And so I think that you couldn't help but have that fear enter, like, oh, would I let people down? Would there be readers that may not understand this, or, yeah. So I think that was a big part of allowing, sort of writing with the doors shut.
Yeah. So speaking of a kind of public eye, I feel like when you're a person like you and you give readings and you're out in the world a lot, you get asked some questions very frequently. What question do you not get asked about the carrying that you actually would like to be able to tell people about?
Yeah, I'm trying to, I think one thing that always surprises me is that people don't talk about the dream poems as much. And I'm always like really interested in the dream poems. And there were like 45 dream poems, and I only put in these. And to me, but I also, they're a little bit difficult to read. Not difficult, but to me, they feel like, if you think the vulnerable narrative or lyric poem is, putting yourself out there, if you read about your dreaming mind, that actually feels almost more exposing. So yeah, that's a question that we don't talk about very often, which is the dream poems.
Well, it was on my list of questions, was actually, because they are in some ways, so to hi Lily Bean, they are in some ways very different than some of what's going on. And then they also, to me, they just inform so much of what's going on. There's so much on the surface grief and loss and precarity and the weird penises coming out of walls and like the men on the beach touching all the women, and it's just it's like violations and devastations really right raw there. And so are they really dreams, or did you shift them into dreams to make them work in the poem?
I love that we're talking about this. Because I really we don't I don't think I've ever been asked about them. And so I was when I got really sick in 2015 and had the vertigo to where I almost couldn't like walk. It was like really hard for me to get out of bed even. I mean, it was terrible. I couldn't I've always written a poem a day for the month of April and I really wanted to do it, but every time I sat down to try to write, like my whole body was just like, you're in pain, you're dizzy, something's wrong, you haven't got your MRI results back, like all of these things. And I couldn't get out of my own sort of inability to mentally and emotionally handle my physicality at that moment. And so, but I didn't want to give up on writing a poem a day because it was always something I really cherished about April. And so I gave myself this opportunity and this challenge to record every single dream nightly, write it down in a journal, and then in the morning or whenever I had time, then craft that dream that I had written almost exactly and craft it into the musicality and lyricism that I would want in a poem. So they're all 100%, everything that's happened in those poems are actual true images from the dream. The only
Wow.
thing that shifted is the language and the music, but all the images are true.
Wow. All right, you and I could talk like all night long,
Yes, good.
but there's a great list of
Have
questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask you one final question. And it is, you say you crafted this into the lyricism and the musicality you want from a poem. I feel with a book like The Caring, which is so theme forward and subject forward and your life forward, that kind of autobiographical, feels confessional. I feel like a book like that, often the questions all end up talking about the themes and the
right.
subjects. But you're a masterful poet, right? You think about the line really carefully. You think about sound and pacing and things. So top three, what are the top three most important things to you to make a poem a poem? What do you go back when you revise and make sure that you pay attention to that takes this into something that you trust as a poem?
That's a great question. And I feel like I'm always revising for sound. That's probably the first thing. And then I'm revising for breath. And that's part of the sound really. It's like, where does the space, where is it holding breath? Where is it, so that's like the pacing. How is it, when do we pause? When do we have the caesura? When do we have the line break? When do we have the stanza break? So that there's some moment of air. I almost think about it as like the four elements. So I think, but like it's the sound, it's the breath. And then it's like, I don't want to, I'm trying to say, it's like the rootedness, the why. Like, why this poem right now? Why? And I think that so often when poems fail for me, it's because I look at them, I'm like, well, it's got great language. There's, good pacing. It's interesting. The images are nice. But why? And I think that I have to ask myself all the time, why is it mattering to me? And then if I find that root and it's there and it's evident and it's clear to me, then I feel like it's ready to at least be shared with maybe Lucas, maybe my husband, and then maybe beyond that. So we'll see. But yeah, those are the first. It's sound and breath, and then that's what's compelling it into the world.
Yeah. That's good to know also that Lucas is the first reader. I think people often, when you write about your marriage and you write about infertility and all those kinds of things, people want to know, like, how does the other person feel about it? So
Right.
does Lucas have any power of refusal to say, please don't share this in the world? Or is that?
He does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. He's never asked me to do that, but he has said like this could, you know, be read this way, or he's given me some great critical eye that has made me revise something, or perhaps even just decided, you know what, that's not for now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, I promised I would stop asking you questions. So I'm now moving to the Q&A. I feel like some of the questions in the Q&A we've covered along this way, but this one feels relatively new. This is from Carolyn Pittman, and she wants to know, the natural world emerges as a major and unifying theme in your books underneath all the other complicated social and interpersonal themes. Do you have any advice for doing this? Carolyn is shaping a manuscript that attempts to process a unique Southern combo. Ooh, boy, that in and of itself is like gonna have so much going on. The complicity of whiteness while also suffering misogyny. Unfortunately, I don't know if that is uniquely Southern, but it is. It has a particular way it looks in the American South, and that's true. And family illness, but the through line is actually consolation in the natural world. Though it's one whole mix inside me, I think it can read as disjointed. And so I think Caroline is really saying, like, I want to talk about the natural world and the greater than human world, but also like there's my family and there's the whiteness and the misogyny and my body and my family's bodies. And how do I get all that into one poem?
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like when you're building a book, like one of the things that's kind of amazing, and you've had this experience, many, like we've talked about this, even with essays, you're like, how do these fit together? And then you're like, oh, they fit together because they're all happening all the time. And that's just the truth. Like the truth is, our lives are not simple contained things. So why would our books be? Why would our poems be? That, like, poetry is meant to be a container that is ever changing, to make room for things, to, if it needs longer lines or different images, or, you know, that. So I think instead of, I guess, being scared of that complexity, I would suggest making room for more of it. Like that maybe what it needs is that maybe it needs more poems that are dealing with that all of this is happening at once, like the idea of simultaneity, right? That it's all happening. A poem about a father that's dear to you and that you love and you want to cherish can also be in the same book that deals with patriarchal misogyny, right? Like that's okay, that's life. And so I think that it's permission to recognize the power that poetry has to make room for complexity, nuance, and that it's flexible in that way. And to not, I guess, give yourself limits as to what the book must contain in order for there to be a narrative, right? There's that great C.D. Wright quote. It's like, the goal is not to make a story, but experience the whole mess. And I'd much rather read a book that was the whole mess than a story I've heard before.
Yeah, I have a lecture I give that talks about how metaphor and simile make meaning happen. It's in you can find it on the Poetry Foundation's
It's
website.
wonderful. Wonderful.
And I talk about a poem from Sharks in the River, a poem from one of Ada's early books called The Crossing, which is like, I love that poem so much. And in that moment, I talk about how meaning is made through approximation sometimes, or more importantly, proximity, right? Approximation is a proximity. And so frequently in Ada's work, what happens is she says one thing and she says another thing. And because she says them very near each other, a third thing happens. And I think in The Caring, one great example of it is that poem, Would You Rather, which of course I heart so much, but it begins with that game, and then by the end it's like you deciding, would I rather, what kind of life do the two of you want to have for together. And then there's the seal. Like, where did the seal come from? Like, you know, and that's that proximity that happens. Like, the seal has to be there. And that's like going back to Caroline's question of the natural world. Like, that seal made that third thing piece to allow these leaps from thinking about a children's game to thinking about fertility to just thinking exist. And so it's that permission to let yourself list and include. I think this leads us to another question here from Oliver Moore. You both talked about the relationship between name and object and addressed it as honoring. Objects become more tangible as they are given their name. But what is there to say about the abstraction between tangibility and word choice? Where is the magic? How do you dial into it?
I mean, I think that, like, I mean, the magic, right, is that moment when someone says, oh, did you know that flower is called like a bird's eye speedwell? And you're like, what? Like, that's called a what? And then you look at it and you can see that the flower looks like a bird's eye, like an actual bird's eye looks at the flower. And everyone is trying to get rid of it, right? Because it's invasive and it's gorgeous. And I think that like just that little moment, that it's not necessarily about this knowledge and intellectualizing nature, but instead of like what it is to then understand and how that helps you understand the mystery a little bit more, and that intimacy with the natural world in which, there are these names that exist, and they are named in certain ways so that we can recognize them and love them. But then also, of course, right, there's lots of names that you don't choose, or the ones that you're like, oh, that wouldn't be the there's a certain, if I say that I'm writing down most everything that's true, right, in the poem Privacy that came out in the New Yorker in May, was it in May? No, it was in March.
March.
I was like, what month is it now? One sip of wine, and I don't know what month it is. I it was in March, and I had put it's the American linden is in it, and really all of that happened on the silver maple. But the music was never right with silver maple, and every time it was like, no, it's on the black, wet branches of the linden, and the linden was the right sound. And so I think that is where it wins out. And it's like, that's when it wins out.
I have so many lindens in my books for that reason. But linden is just like, it's not that linden as opposed to maple or oak. It's the vowels and that lovely L coming in and the closing, nice close of the N sound at the end. So there's a question here about I'm gonna merge two questions. I'm actually gonna merge Jenna Goldsmith's poem and Sarah Lintz's question. Jenna Goldsmith's question is how it feels to be a Kentucky poet, and Sarah Lintz's question is how your writing process changes from book to book. And I'm gonna add a third question to it, which is how your location. Like what it means to be writing out of Kentucky versus writing out of California versus writing out of New York, and how that changes your process and your subject matter and all those things.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, we talk about this, like the landscape is so important to our poems. And I really feel like that, like Bright Dead Things would have never happened if I didn't move to Kentucky. It's a book because I was feeling somehow uprooted, right? There was the death of my stepmother, there was my new love, and there was a new landscape. And those three things are the reason Bright Dead Things exists. And I don't think that would have happened. And I don't think the carrying would have happened if there was like also the continuation of that new landscape, the naming of things, but also then the question of like, what's next, right? Like after this, do you have a child? Do you not have a child? Can you have a child? All these things. And then beyond that, what is it to be living in the South? What is it to be identifying with a new area? Um, and I think even now, the questions that I'm working on, as we all know, we're writing in this sort of isolation in the world of the sheltering in place. And I'm, instead of feeling sort of more distant, I'm feeling incredibly focused in on the birds, the backyard, the trees, the like they've become, it's as if I've dropped acid and all of my animals and bird friends are just like kind of moved in to my heart, and and because of that I haven't felt lonely, and I think that
We're,
that's
we're
huge.
all Snow White
Yeah.
living in the woods with our little bird friends.
Totally, totally. It's so true. It's so true. But yeah, so I think that the books are changing because, I mean, one, they change because I change. I change, I alter, I'm different, I grow, I hope. Uh, and then, yeah, I mean, when landscape changes, when that acknowledgement of what's around us, whether it's the lens or the landscape itself, that's always going to change as well.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to try and honor a couple people by, again, merging a couple questions. And so Chloe had this wonderful question about whether or not you feel that your poems usually begin with something outside of yourself or something inside of yourself. And Hala had the question of what writing about the body has taught you about the body. And so if you're writing from inside yourself and your body, what does that teach you? And what is writing outside yourself, if that starts, what does that teach you about?
Yeah. I think that's great. I think that poems start both ways. You probably feel the same way, Camille, that it's like sometimes it really comes up from right here and it's like, okay, this is what Lorca meant about duende living inside the blood and coming out, right? It's in me. I have dug this out. And then there are times where it's like, oh no, that this image has arrived. Like these, these crows are, they're telling me something and they don't want to be used in a poem, but I'm putting them in anyway. Whatever it is, it's like that kind of witnessing. So I think they happen both ways. Um, I think that writing about the body has taught me many things, but one is that we're in a body and bodies just be so body. And body is just body and body. And I find it really fascinating that we don't talk about it that much. I mean, when I'm with my friends, and Camille knows this, like we talk about our bodies, we talk about what we're going through, we talk about pain, we talk about this, we talk, and then when we are in a public setting, it's like, I can do it, I got this, I got, there's just such a sense of a culture of, I guess ableism, you would call it, where it just feels like everything is like, I can handle it. And also strength and like this like idea of what strength is. And I think writing about the body has given me a little tenderness to my own body, and recognition that I don't always have to be forcing it to do something that it's not comfortable with. Um, and also recognizing in my conversations with others that we are all, like many of us, struggle. And if there's anything, I know that Camille and I have talked about this, is that as much as we want the world to open, the fact that we are able to have these wonderful events together like this, um, not only allows for all different kinds of bodies to be watching this, but from all different kinds of places. And then also to be recognizing that we are lowering our carbon footprint by not flying. So I feel like if there's one thing that's good, I'm hoping that we keep these Zooms so that our bodies, our differently able bodies can be safe and protected and move throughout the world in different ways.
Yeah, and also that amazing Lit Hub essay you just published, it's kinder. It's kinder on our bodies, like to like not be in perpetual jet lag and not be running through airports and trying to carry a suitcase on your back, you know, all these other things, what might come from your writing. So maybe that can be that, oh, I hate this question, but I'm going to ask it. What might be next for your amazing readers, by the way? Their Q&As, like, you've got really smart readers because these are wonderful, wonderful Q&As. So what can they look forward to next from you?
Well, thank you for that. I adore you, Camille. I feel like one of the things that I'm working on is I'm very close to finishing a 6th book of poems. It has a title somewhere, I think, in it, and it's very close to being done. I'm hoping it's just weeks away. And then I'm also working on a little bit more prose here and there. That's I laugh that if you read the body essay, I can only write prose if I think of it as stanzas. And my husband is like, yeah, they're called paragraphs. So yes, so poetry, I have a book that's almost complete, and then some prose just, will be happening here and there.